Welcome to Life Stories. In today's story, we dive into the powerful journey of Sophia, a woman trapped in a marriage built on control and fear. For years, she sacrificed everything, believing she had no way out. But when she discovers the truth about her husband's betrayal, she makes a daring decision to reclaim her life. This is a story of courage, resilience, and the fight for freedom. Stay with us as we unfold Sophia's emotional escape and ultimate triumph. Subscribe to Life Stories now to begin today's story. The evening air was thick with the scent of asphalt and distant car fumes as Sophia stepped off the packed bus. Her legs aching from another exhausting shift at the office, the weight of her handbag pressed against her shoulder, and she reached inside to check for the envelope containing her hard-earned salary. It was there, safe, for now. But she knew it wouldn't be hers for long. The rhythmic sound of her heels against the pavement did little to calm the unease in her chest. The closer she got to the small apartment she shared with Ethan, the more her stomach twisted in knots. She already knew how the evening would unfold. There would be no warm greeting, no questions about how her day had been. Instead, she would find him sitting on the couch, waiting, not for her, but for the money. Ethan had once been charming. Or at least that was how she remembered him from the early days. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures, whispered promises of a beautiful future, and the unwavering confidence of a man who seemed to have everything under control. But over time, control became more than a quality, it became a demand. The loving words turned into expectations, and those expectations turned into rules. As she pushed open the door, the atmosphere inside felt suffocating. Ethan barely looked up from his phone, but she could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on her. "Hey," she said softly, hoping, foolishly, that tonight might be different. He finally glanced at her, his eyes dark with impatience. "You're late." Sophia swallowed hard, shifting on her feet. "I had to stay overtime. They asked me to help with a last-minute project." Ethan scoffed, setting his phone down on the coffee table. "Overtime? Huh? Well, let's see it." She hesitated, gripping the strap of her handbag tightly. Maybe, just maybe, she could ask to keep a little this time. Just enough for personal expenses, perhaps even to buy herself something small. Something that reminded her she was still a person, not just a provider. "Ethan," she started hesitantly, forcing a small smile, "since I worked extra hours this month, I was thinking, maybe I could keep just a little." His head snapped up at that, his entire body stiffening. "What did you just say?" Her fingers curled around the envelope inside her bag. "I mean, just a little, for small things, personal expenses." A slow, humorless smirk spread across Ethan's lips as he leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against the armrest. "Are you forgetting who takes care of this household?" His voice was calm, but the sharpness beneath it made her stomach clench. "You work. Yes, but this is my house. Sophia, your job is to contribute completely, or have you started thinking you're too important to follow the rules?" She lowered her gaze, the familiar weight of defeat settling in her chest. This wasn't a conversation. It never was. It was an ultimatum. Without another word, she pulled out the envelope and handed it over, watching as Ethan counted every last bill with satisfaction. "That's more like it," he muttered. She stood there for a moment, her heart sinking. It wasn't just the money that was taken from her, it was her dignity. Days turned into weeks, each one identical to the last. Sophia worked tirelessly, but her earnings were stripped from her hands the moment she walked through the door. Ethan spent freely, as if her sacrifices were meaningless. Rent, groceries, bills, she funded it all. Yet he walked around as if he were the one in charge. One evening, as she cleared the dinner table, she decided to try again. She had to. "Ethan," she said cautiously, keeping her tone even, "I don't mind contributing, but I feel like I should be allowed to keep something for myself, even just enough for personal needs." The scrape of his chair against the floor sent a chill down her spine. He stood up, towering over her. "And why exactly do you need personal money?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. Sophia's grip tightened on the dishcloth in her hands. "I work hard too, Ethan, just a little for." His palm slammed onto the table, making her flinch. Are you questioning me? He bellowed, his face dark with irritation. Do you think I don't provide enough for this family? You're acting ungrateful. She bit the inside of her cheek, swallowing down the anger that burned inside her. Ungrateful. Did he truly not see what he was doing? You don't even ask if I need anything, she whispered, barely above a murmur. But he heard her. His laugh was cold, devoid of warmth. You have everything you need. A roof over your head and a husband who handles things. Your money belongs to me. And if you don't like it... He stepped closer, lowering his voice to something more menacing. Then maybe you should think about what happens when a wife disrespects her husband. Sophia's heart pounded. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was control. And she was suffocating. Sophia sat at a small cafe near her office, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. The warm aroma of cinnamon and honey filled the air, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. Across from her, Rachel watched her closely, concern etched into her features. Something's wrong, isn't it? Rachel asked gently, reaching across the table to touch Sophia's hand. Sophia forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's just work, she lied. Rachel arched an eyebrow. Don't do that. Don't pretend you're fine when I can see right through you. Sophia sighed, her fingers tightening around her teacup. For weeks, she had been trying to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut, the knowledge that things wouldn't change unless she made them. She had stayed silent, hoping Ethan would see reason. But he never did. He never would. It's Ethan, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He takes all of my salary. Every single month. I have nothing of my own. Rachel's eyes widened, shock quickly turning to anger. That's financial abuse. Sophia, you do know that, right? Sophia shifted uncomfortably. He says it's part of being a wife. That I should support the household. That I shouldn't question him. Rachel scoffed, crossing her arms. Support? That's not support, that's control. What does he even do with the money? Sophia hesitated before answering. I don't know. He never tells me. Rachel let out a frustrated sigh. You need to get out of this situation. Start saving, even if it's just small amounts. If he's taking everything, you have nothing to fall back on if... She stopped herself. But Sophia already knew what she was about to say. If something goes wrong... Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. She had known for a while that something had to change. But how? That night, she sat in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, staring at the small bonus check in her trembling hands. It wasn't much, but it was hers, a small reward for the late nights. The extra projects, the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. She traced the embossed name of her company, knowing full well that keeping this money meant stepping into dangerous territory. Ethan would never allow it. The thought of his reaction sent a shiver down her spine. But for the first time, the weight of her silence felt heavier than the fear of his anger. Why should she work herself to the bone only to remain penniless? With nothing to show for her efforts? Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. She would keep this bonus hidden, just this once. Just to feel what it was like to own something of her own. The next morning, she folded the check into a small envelope and slipped it between the pages of an old novel, burying it deep in the bottom of her dresser drawer. As she moved around the house, her nerves remained on edge. Ethan watched her like a hawk, his gaze calculating, his presence suffocating. That evening, as she handed over her monthly salary with a forced smile, she could feel her pulse in her throat. Would he notice the missing amount? Would he count the bills and realize she had dared to keep something for herself? But Ethan merely took the envelope with a satisfied smirk, not even bothering to look inside. Sophia released a shaky breath, relief washing over her. She had done it. She had kept a piece of herself hidden. But deep inside, she knew this small victory was a warning. Defying Ethan, no matter how subtly, was a risk. And soon, he would remind her why. The restaurant was packed with family and friends, gathered to celebrate Ethan's uncle's birthday. Laughter echoed through the private dining room. Plates clinked against polished wooden tables, and the rich aroma of grilled steak and red wine filled the air. Sophia sat beside Ethan, her posture stiff as she forced a polite smile. Events like these were always a performance, a chance for Ethan to play the role of the devoted husband. The successful provider. The conversation drifted toward finances and household responsibilities. Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink with a smirk. I always tell Sophia that a wife's duty is to support her husband, no questions asked. He said casually. She gives me her full salary every month because she trusts me to handle things. Like a man should. A few men chuckled in agreement, nodding approvingly. Across the table, some of the women exchanged glances, some surprised, some pitying. Heat rushed to Sophia's face, shame burning through her veins. The way he spoke, it was as if she were a child handing over an allowance. Not a grown woman working just as hard as he did. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Actually, she said quietly, her voice trembling yet firm, I think it's important for both partners to have financial independence. I mean, what if there's an emergency and I need? Ethan's hand landed heavily on her knee under the table, his grip tight and unforgiving. Sophia, he interrupted, his smile never faltering, but his tone laced with warning. There is no, what if, in a marriage built on trust. I take care of everything. Isn't that right? The room fell silent, eyes flicked between them, sensing the tension. Sophia's throat went dry, she could feel the pressure of his fingers digging into her leg. A silent command to submit. What else could she do? Challenge him here, in front of everyone? Risk the inevitable rage that would follow? She forced a nod. Right, she whispered. Ethan patted her knee, as if rewarding her obedience, before returning to his meal, acting as though nothing had happened. But something inside Sophia had shifted. That night, when Ethan was asleep, she sat in the bedroom with the bedside lamp casting long shadows against the walls. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the bank statements she had secretly retrieved from his study. The numbers stared back at her, mocking her ignorance. Thousands of dollars missing, withdrawn in lump sums, labeled under vague descriptions. None of it accounted for household expenses. Her heart pounded as she ran her finger over a particular transaction, an expensive watch purchased from a high-end store she had never set foot in. Another charge for luxury shoes. Hotel bookings at resorts she had never been to. She felt sick. Ethan wasn't just controlling her finances. He was using them to fund a lavish life she had no part in. That night, when Ethan returned home, Sophia stood waiting for him in the living room, the bank statements clutched in her hand. Where is this money going? She demanded, her voice sharp and unwavering. Ethan paused in the doorway, his expression briefly shifting to one of surprise before darkening. Excuse me? These withdrawals, she pressed, stepping closer, holding up the evidence. Thousands of dollars missing. And you never once told me where it was going. I think I have the right to know. Ethan exhaled through his nose, his expression twisting into something ugly. You're right, he said slowly, mockingly. You do have the right to know. A cold, humorless laugh escaped his lips. Let me explain something to you. Sophia, the money in this house is mine to do with as I please. You work for me. Your job is to provide. And my job is to manage it. Don't ever question me again. Sophia's hands clenched at her sides. But she said nothing. She knew there was no reasoning with him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. And for the first time, she realized, if she ever wanted to escape, she needed more than just courage. She needed a plan. Sophia sat in her car outside the office parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The bank statements replayed in her mind like a broken record, the evidence of Ethan's deceit, laid out so clearly before her. She had worked tirelessly, believing she was supporting her family, only to realize she was funding his extravagant lifestyle. The humiliation stung deep, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the realization that she had allowed this to happen. How had she let him strip her of everything, her freedom, her dignity, her choices? No more. Sophia knew she couldn't confront him again. Not yet. Ethan thrived on control, and if he sensed rebellion, he would tighten his grip even further. She needed a way out. But an escape without resources was just a fantasy. Later that evening, as she sat at the dinner table pretending to listen to Ethan talk about important business, her mind was elsewhere. She had made up her mind. She would start saving, little by little, hiding it where he wouldn't think to look. The next morning, she withdrew a small portion of cash before depositing her paycheck. Just a tiny amount, enough to go unnoticed. She tucked the money inside an old handbag at the back of her closet. It wasn't much, but it was hers. That evening, as they ate dinner, Ethan watched her closely. "You're quiet today," he said, his tone casual but laced with suspicion. Sophia forced a smile, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. "Just tired," she murmured, keeping her voice even. She had spent years surviving in this marriage by making herself small, by appeasing him. But now, for the first time, she was hiding something. And that small act of defiance made her feel alive again. 2 weeks passed since she started her secret savings. Though it was only a small stash, it represented something far bigger, hope. But hope was fragile, and Ethan had a way of destroying anything she held close. That evening, she was folding laundry when he walked into the bedroom. His expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice void of its usual arrogance. Sophia stiffened, setting down a neatly folded blouse. "About what?" Ethan tossed a bank slip onto the bed, his dark eyes pinning her down like a predator eyeing wounded prey. Her breath caught. It was a withdrawal receipt. The one she had taken before depositing her last paycheck. Her stomach twisted. Had she been careless? Had he checked the account history? How much did he know? "Care to explain why there's money missing from your salary deposit?" he asked. His voice deceptively calm. Sophia swallowed hard, her mind racing. "It was just a little, for personal needs," she lied, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid pounding of her heart. Ethan's lips curled into a smirk. But there was nothing amused about it. "Personal needs?" He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Let me make something clear." Sophia, his fingers dug into her wrist as he gripped her tightly. "You don't make financial decisions. I do. You don't take what doesn't belong to you. Everything you earn belongs to me. If you ever think of keeping even a cent from me again, I promise, you'll regret it." The quiet menace in his voice sent ice through her veins. He had never hit her. But there were other ways to inflict pain: control, fear, manipulation. And he wielded them like weapons. Sophia nodded, her face blank, her emotions hidden. "I understand," she whispered. But inside, something had snapped. She would not live the rest of her life like this. Sophia stood at the airport terminal, gripping her boarding pass tightly as she stared at the vast expanse of the runway. The hum of distant conversations and the soft, mechanical voice announcing flight departures barely registered in her mind. She had done it. She was leaving. For years, she had convinced herself that she had no way out, that Ethan's grip on her life was unbreakable. But now, as she prepared to step onto a plane bound for a new city, she realized the truth. The chains that had bound her weren't made of iron, they had been built from fear. And fear could be conquered. Shane stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He had been her lifeline in these last few days, making sure she had a place to go. A fresh start. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Sophia exhaled, a slow, trembling breath. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Shane smiled. "That's what matters." As she walked down the jet bridge, her heart pounded, not with fear, but with exhilaration. This was more than just a flight. This was her freedom. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in years, it was hers to decide. Because Sophia was no longer a woman who lived in someone else's shadow. She was a woman who had reclaimed her life. The best revenge is living well. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.